Hi, good evening, Lee. How are you?
Hi, Imran. Good evening. How are you doing?
Great. So we're excited to be here to present for the International Trade Council. And today, Hang Lee and myself, Imran Haque, will be sharing with you some of our experiences. Hopefully that will be beneficial for you. The focus around this conversation today is around digital venture building, and particularly within that, for companies and startups that are focusing on B2B or business to business. The companies that we represent, so we are both partners at Mentors Fund, and we also work at Sabi Digital, and we'll share with you a little bit more about it and why this is relevant for this conversation. To start off with, I'm going to ask my friend and colleague Lee to share a little bit about himself.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Just a little background on myself. I actually didn't start my career in venture or anything. My undergrad at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point here in the U.S., but I did study electrical engineering there. But afterwards, it's a college set up by the U.S. military. I had to serve for 5 years in the U.S. Army, where I spent some time in Europe and Middle East. And then afterwards, I went to Boston at Harvard for my MBA to transition into business. And the start of my business career was with an investment bank in New York called Credit Suisse. Well, it's a Swiss investment bank, but I worked in their New York office mostly on providing corporate debt for private equity firms. Did that for a few years, and then currently I'm doing a few things. I'm leading strategy and finance at a industrial tech company where we sell a lot to, all of our business are other enterprise customers. And on top of that, I am a advisor to Sabi, that's Imran's company. And I've participated in a few of the engagements that Imran has brought me into. And then lastly, I invest alongside Imran at Mentors Fund, where we focus on early stage digital tech companies.
Thank you, Lee. So there's a lot of stuff Lee does. I don't know how he has time. So it's close to 6 p.m. on Thursday night in New York, and so we're recording this now. So my background, I started as an entrepreneur, did 3 different startups first stage in my career. And then I realized that I didn't understand quite how large organizations work. So I got an opportunity to work at Pfizer in the headquarters in New York. Pfizer, the giant pharmaceuticals, the name is very prevalent today. In the last few months, because of the vaccine, they were the first ones with the COVID vaccine. So I worked on different functions there: technology, analytics, portfolio management, and digital. During my time there, I spent about 15 years, half of which was on the human side, and then I transitioned to the division within Pfizer at that time, which was focused on the veterinarian care. So pets, large animal, farm animal, small animal. And so I moved there, and that basically became a company called Zoetis. That's today the world's largest animal health pharma company. And I was head of digital strategy and e-commerce there. So beyond that, I actually completely switched my career and moved for a short period of time and became the chief digital officer at CMA CGM. It's the largest container shipping company in North America, one of the top 3 in the world, 30 billion in revenue. And after that, for the last few years, I've been working in 2 areas. One is as a founding partner at Mentors Fund. So with some other industry friends and colleagues, we started Mentors Fund. And also as the founder and CEO of Sabi Digital, which is a venture building firm. And the reason why Mentors Fund is unique is that we basically, all our partners are also practitioners. Some come from a financial background, some come from corporate, some come as entrepreneurs, but all of us have actual practical work experience that help us mentor entrepreneurs and early stage companies. We've invested in close to 40 companies since our formation about 3+ years ago. We do early stage and in various different industries, but all of them focus on where digital technology is disrupting the space. So today, what we wanted to share with you, and hopefully be and experience that will be valuable for you as entrepreneurs is we will share with you a little bit on the business to business context. So there are various companies that start off focusing on business to consumer. Our focus today will be on business to business. So if you're selling into that space, there may be many things you do. So for example, when I was the chief digital officer at CMA, we were looking at from a digital perspective at various things, a new product experience, a new channel, perhaps targeting new customers, operational excellence. So how can we maybe create some efficiencies? How can digital help with any function, finance, HR, just operations when we move ships back and forth with containers? There's plethora of areas of improvement, and then overall customer experience, any customer facing function as well. Within these functions, you could be saying, tools to use and digitize for sales processes. So companies that are focused in B2B could be addressing, myriad of different areas. The first step that happens when companies are actually targeting large organizations, because large organizations aren't going to just take any digital product or solution and try to adopt it. They have to be comfortable with it. They want to make sure it works. And the first step there is usually a proof of concept. Some people call it a proof of concept, where there's a defined period of time where they test in a real environment, but maybe with constraints, and validate whether this technology or product or service would work, or some people call it a pilot program. So what we want to do today is share with you our experience on if you're in that situation where you're trying to target business to business large organizations, and you've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to be able to convince someone that you want to run a proof of concept or a pilot. How might you move to the next step? What are the things that you should be aware that you're successful and come out of this with a master services agreement, a long-term contract that will help jumpstart your organization for success? So Lee and I basically put together a few thoughts here that we have, and we'll be sharing this presentation as well for you. So we believe there are 5 key things, and there might be more, but 5 key things that we believe and lessons that what we've seen allow our companies that we invest in and our own experiences that companies should be focused on. What we'll do is we'll walk through each one of these areas of focus and share some stories with you, a little bit about what you should be thinking and doing as you move and go through your journey. The first is the organization, understanding the organization that you're trying to target and work with. Second is from your product perspective, what is the real value that your product is providing and benefits that it has? Third is putting a plan together for measuring success for the pilot and proof of concept program. And then a critical component that often people forget is putting all those processes and tools in place, resource tools, people, etc., that will help you scale beyond the pilot to make it successful. And finally, and most critically, the critical component is always change management, right? You're bringing something new, you might be displacing something, you might be adding something net new that they were doing manually. How would you manage change through that? So Lee and I will go through the next 5 slides to talk you through and, hopefully give you some examples. You might sometimes camouflage the names of the companies, but that's what we'll try to do. Lee, would you like to add anything here?
Nope. I think I'm ready to talk about all these.
Perfect. So what we'll do, the way we'll do it, we'll make it hopefully engaging for you. Lee and I will basically have a conversation around it. So Lee, when I've seen companies come in, and these are the same companies that you come pitch to me as a function. I was a leader in a multiple organizations as head of digital, but I had a remit. My remit was bring innovation to the company. I had certain P&L responsibilities at the company, but I wasn't head of sales. I wasn't in charge of the different business lines. And in each of these situations, often I saw companies that came and pitched to me, and they thought, hey, if Imran or the chief digital officer likes something, this is great. Our job is done. But the reality was that in turn, I had to obviously bring innovation, which I felt, but then I had to convince my colleagues in other departments, because if they didn't buy into it, if they weren't convinced, I wasn't able to be successful, and neither would the startup company be. What are your thoughts when you see startups come in, pitch to larger organizations, and the hurdles they might face from an organization perspective?
Yeah, sure. I think one of my first thoughts when I saw this, this organization, I think people might be wondering, like, in a consumer focused product, you always talk about who is your ideal customer, right? You're thinking about, oh, it's, it's a single male in his 30s, or like someone that is in need of a ride, or someone that's in need of doctor appointment, right? You have kind of a defined persona that you're going after, right? But in to B, it's organizations, and these organizations are in different industries, right? And then they, because of the size of the organization, the industry of the organization, they have very different dynamics in them, and it's really hard to. So for a consumer focused business, a lot of the different I think products most people can kind of relate to, because we all at some point we all needed a doctor's appointment, or a car ride or whatnot. But selling to businesses, it's harder. You need to kind of understand. You should have, like, for an oil and gas company, or for a manufacturing facility, or for a hospital, how that organization runs. You really need to understand how that works, right? So when we evaluate startups, we have to know, like, how do you understand the organization, right? That usually comes in terms of, from our perspective, at least one of the co-founders needs to be from that industry, because you truly don't know how. I mean, many of us have been to hospitals before, or we've seen pictures of we've been to restaurants, and we've been to malls, but like, how does a mall or a hospital really run, like behind the scenes? And how do the decision makers decide to purchase something? We really don't know. You really need to be part of that organization in order to go there. So my recommendation here for anyone that wants to do a B2B startup is, one, it should be like some industry you're familiar with, right? And if you don't, then you should find someone that has been inside of that industry, and then you should want to co-found the company with them. One thing that I do want to highlight is the benefit of a B2B business. And I usually, Imran and I talk about this a lot. The good thing is that, because not a lot of other people can kind of relate to the problems of the organizations, right? It's in a lot of them, hospitals and factories. These are hundreds of billions of dollars of industries, but a lot less people kind of understand that problem, right? Like ride hailing, or like food ordering. There are dozens of apps, and from my perspective, entry to barrier is lower versus if you already, you've been on a factory floor for many years, you kind of already know that how that industry operates. There will be a lot less people that understand that dynamic. So, getting over that industry knowledge hurdle will be, for you, it's a lot lower than most other potential entrepreneurs out there. So that's a benefit of doing a B2B.
No, for sure. And I think one of the things I realized was, especially if you're focused on improving, let's say you have a product that improves operational effectiveness somewhere, whatever that operations might be. Most large organizations have, one of the reasons they're large is they understand how to run large operations. And part of large operations is that you ensure there's a process, there's part of the, even if it's not automated, if it's manual, that there's a whole structure and process and people and controls. And when you introduce anything, in a new thing in a controlled environment, it can cause havoc. So one of the things I've seen is people say, "Oh, I'll do a pilot. It's like a test environment. It's great. Look, it's working fine." And then you talk to this, head of operations of the department or overall head, and they look at it not just by saying, "Oh, this will improve this." They also look at the fact that if something new is introduced to a system, a controls environment and a control system, it might actually cause issues and risks. And the thing is, who's underwriting that risk? Who's managing that? So often they look at it and say, okay, so my operations are fine. I potentially might get some productivity, or this might fail, but this actually could cause havoc to my operations. And why do I want to take the risk? Why do I want to bring something on? I'm already under stress. So understanding as to whose life you might enhance. So you might be saying, oh, the chief digital officer got this great technology, partnered with you, invested in you, bought you in for this pilot. But the chief operating officer might say, dude, wait a second, this might actually create a lot of risk. So mapping out internally, and as Lee said, understanding the industry so you know what kind of functions exist. Every organization will be different, but the core functions within an oil and gas company or any industry, pharmaceuticals, there'll be certain functions. So understanding what their risks are, what their benefits are, what's their sort of what we call WIFM, what's in it for me, what's in it for them, each role, and then mapping it out, and then ensuring that you know who brought you in, but it might not be the person who's actually signing off for production. So understanding an org is very, very critical, and who the role players are. Great. So next one we have on the list is, let me just move to the next slide, is real value. So what do I mean by real value? Here, what I'm trying to understand is, or share with you is, once you have a product, you also want to ensure that it truly and really adds value. And my question is always mirror, mirror, because as individuals and entrepreneurs, we're always selling. We're selling our capabilities. I'm often selling to people for a client from Sabi Digital. Other times, if I see a really hot company, I'm telling them that we're really good mentors to invest in them, right? Companies often have choices. So one question is, you have to truly believe that the product service that you have is actually going to add real value to the customer, not just optics. And perhaps sometimes you're not sure. You think it will, but as you learn through the proof of concept, or as you learn more about the industry or particular company, you can pivot, you can evolve, you can say, sure, it wasn't adding value here, let me add value here. But you must believe. You have to believe, because if you don't believe, somewhere, somebody will find out eventually and catch you and say, whoa, why are we investing in this solution, right? Sometimes you might get away, but in general, strong advice is you need to know, is your product bringing more revenue for them? Is it adding a new segment of customers they might open up for them? Is it adding more productivity? Is it improving costs? Is there a cost saving? How will we measure that cost, right? So you have to have a good understanding of this. Lee, in your experiences working with startups, what are your thoughts and how companies think about this and how entrepreneurs should think about real value?
Yeah, so one of the questions I always ask B2B startup founders is, how does your customers measure ROI? We're in a hyper competitive world today. I think no matter where you are, US, Europe, Asia, companies are, looking at financial metrics, right? In public companies and in private companies, everyone's looking at financial metrics. So every type of spending a company look at, they really need to understand what is the value, and you as the entrepreneur should really understand that. I have a framework, kind of a framework that I like to think about whenever I look at a startup, which is, first of all, who are the users of this product, and the second, what are the levels of decision making to purchase that product, because it could be very different. For instance, I like to talk about factories because that's a space I focus on. You can have a software that sells to the engineers, right? But the software could be bought by either the factory level manager or the company the company CFO, right? Because at certain factories or certain manufacturing corporations that own many factories, each factory, they have a manager that has decision making on $200,000 or less spend, right? They don't need to report up to the CFO, and any prices over that, it's $200,000 that the CFO needs to approve, and the process might be longer, right? And you as a entrepreneur should use that to your advantage. You think, oh, if I want this to sell fast, then maybe I should, that'll dictate your pricing to be 200 or less, right? And if you want the factory level managers to buy this, then you got to think, what is the value? What are the metrics that these factory managers are being held against, or that they really want, right? Um, and then then you got to think about the user side. Um, just because someone else is making the decision to purchase doesn't mean that the user feedback is not important, because you know, a lot of corporations these days, they do ask like, oh, we're spending all this money on this software, like, is it useful? And if all the users are saying, oh, this is crap, oh, by the way, like this other software that has a freemium model that we're already all using anyways, we should just like go with that, right? So that's really important. So you got to think about like, what is that dynamic between like the value, like what you're trying to achieve for the users, right? Probably efficiency and, you know, save time for them. And then like, you know, at the decision makers, which are usually financial, and then what are the dynamics that these different users of the organization kind of interact with to make that decision. And then, and one of the things that last things I want to highlight, I think it's to a certain extent, enterprise um, startup value is almost easier to measure than consumer. Consumer adoption, sometimes it's really hard to kind of figure out. I mean, we can look at fashion fads, right? Or you know, if you ask me to think about TikTok, me in my mid 30s, if you brought TikTok to me, I don't know, several years ago, I probably would say like, what is this, right? It doesn't have any value to me. But now it's one of the hottest social media stock ever, or company ever, right? But at any time, I can probably say that like, you know, for the past like decades, and then maybe for the next several decades, I know that all companies are going to think about, as long as they're for profit, they're all going to think about revenues. They're all going to think about, you know, cost. They're all going to think about disruption and risk. That is a easier thing in my mind. But you know, I'm biased. I focus on this area to think about than a consumer focused company.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. This is excellent. And I think one of the things that I've seen, and we've seen this actually, where sometimes what happens is because you haven't sold the value to as the, for example, two roles, right? The engineer or the user and the CFO. Now you have to have alignment. That doesn't mean you have to pitch the same thing. In fact, I've seen people pitch technology and detailed engineering specs to a CFO who could care less, right? They're looking, so you have to be very savvy in terms of what you position. But I've seen this where companies would startups where we're looking for due diligence would give us access to, we're doing a proof of concept there. We would, let's say call the CFO and they would be like, oh, I would never pay for it beyond the proof of concept, right? Because they've never aligned with him or her. And so understanding the real value for all the players is important. Next is success measures. And here, what I'm referring to is focus around measurement of the proof of concept. So not just your product, but what you're trying to test and validate. So proof of concept is exactly what it says, right? Or pilot. You're trying to prove something. But if you're trying to prove something, like in any experiment, you have to put baseline metrics, what your targets are, what your expectation is, what does success look like, and ensuring that the success metrics may be different for different stakeholders, but that you have sign off from all of them. Because you might be saying, my favorite quote that I use, a cliche that I've used with Lee before is, the operation was successful, but the patient died, right? Oh, the proof of concept was successful, but we're not going to use you because the measurements that we put in place weren't what would create value for us. So any thoughts there, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest point here is just you need to actually do it as a entrepreneur, like actually like dig through the numbers. Because we see this a lot of startups that like, I get it, right? Like they have a better tool, it saves you time, right? And like, or it actually looks through every line of a procurement list and identify like what you're overpaying and stuff. Like you can tell me like, yeah, I get that, what that tool is doing, but do you know what the actual number is, right? You as the entrepreneur need to do the work and then kind of figure out what the actual percentage is, right? What that does is it helps you, with the current POC and pilot, once like, all corporations operate on numbers, right? When they kind of go into negotiations and kind of go into renewal, they look at, at 15% versus 20% versus 30% versus, oh, we just save time, like, or we save costs. We know for sure we save costs. It's very different, right? And on top of that, you want to sell to others, right? If you have an anchor customer, you put that in your on your sell stack. Hey, we helped this grocery store optimize their supply chain for, like, this many percentage. You sent that out to other grocery store owners. They see it. They're like, oh yeah, this is what I need. If this grocery store can do this, then I need to compete with them, right? I need my financial bottom line to improve. I need to do that too. So this is an actual work you need to do. Just like get your Excel out and kind of compute those numbers.
Absolutely, and be flexible and willing to evolve and pivot as you go through it. Talking of pivoting and evolving, next thing that's critical, and this is probably one of the most critical things, right? Because I've seen so many successful or so many entrepreneurs who are amazing, products that they create are amazing. Their proof of concept, they come, people approve or say, oh, it was pretty good, but they are not able to scale beyond that. And the reason is because often they don't have experience in large organizations. So they're really good at creating product, they're creative, they're innovative, but they don't have real world practical experience. So as Lee earlier mentioned, ensuring that you have people in the startup, could be in the beginning advisors or ideally one of the co-founders, somebody who understands the space. But scaling something from a product to a large organization, could be Exxon, could be Pfizer, any of these large organizations, you have to think of a lot of things. Often you might be trying to substitute or be a replacement for a system, right? So, or you might be a new module, but has to integrate with a larger system. I've seen people, everything is going well, they're fine, people like it. Then they start talking to the larger, maybe ERP provider, enterprise resource planning system provider, and they say, oh, no, we're not going to integrate with this because, they're large organizations and they can choose to say no, and you don't have licensure with them or the API doesn't work, whatever it might be, right? So those are challenges, right? So you have to think through, plan. Second is around infrastructure, right? What is infrastructure? These days it's much easier with AWS and Azure and all these Google Cloud, but how do you plan to scale? Ensuring, because in the beginning the client IT organization might not have looked at it. Later on, they might say, oh, we don't do AWS because of this reasons, or you have HIPAA reasons, you have to use a different cloud. So, understanding all that as much as you can early on. And that's an art, because if you ask too many questions, you might create your own hurdles. So it's an art of trying to balance between trying to get into the POC, quickly doing it, but at the same time, discovery. And then, how will you train? Most large organizations have a whole support organization. You would probably have to train them or create, if they're using ServiceNow or Zendesk or Salesforce Service Cloud, how do you make sure that this is not a one-off experience? Because users want something streamlined, right? If I'm an engineer, this is just another module. If you create a different process for me, I would most likely not enjoy that experience, right? How do you onboard new users? All those things are important. What are some of the things that you've seen, Lee, in advising companies and your own company that you've run in terms of, scaling beyond the pilot?
Yeah, I think I want to talk about this in like just two, I guess, dimensions. One is the mechanics of just the company, B2B versus to consumer, B2C. And then the other dimension is actually you as the entrepreneur, or us as the entrepreneurs, the types of work that, we kind of start doing differently. The mechanics, actually, that's the easier part. I think it's essentially, what I say is you're scaling sales in enterprise organization. You can kind of, what I mean by that is you look at, and marketing and sales are very different. If you work in 2B type of business, you should understand what that is. Because you actually have a sales force, and you actually have people that are almost like consultants on the product that you're trying to sell, that talks with your customers, right? And depending on the size of your product, like the price of your product, you might be talking you could be talking to your customer CEOs and CFOs, right? And so, versus a consumer product, you're trying to think, oh, where do I spend my marketing dollars? How do I do a marketing campaign, right? On Facebook, on Google search, SEO, like, right? Because I'm distributing some sort of app. right? I just need more, create great demand, and then have the right distribution points, and then customers can come and get, buy my product once I have the right value, right persona figured out, right? For enterprise type of sales, it's about like, I need to get the sales force, and we need to send people out. How do we like control, like, is it a channel partnership, or do I work with a consulting firm to sell my products, right? It's a different, that's the mechanics of it, I think, scaling there. So then, in order to do that, it's like the keyword I used is Salesforce, right? You're managing more people. So I think at the enterprise level, but I think it's to see as well, to scale, you're actually, what you need to do as an entrepreneur, if you were a product person or engineer or finance person, you need to become a people person. As you sell to more, you have more revenue dollars, you tend to have more people in your organization, and you need to know how to manage them. You need to know how to because you're not going to know every single function. You may not be the person who's led Salesforce before. You need to hire the right talent, right? For my own company right now, Cruiser Industrial, we're about 100 people organization. Right now, I'm reading about HR myself, how to hire, retain talent, right? I'm talking to my HR person all the time. Even though, like, that's not what my job is, but I need to think about how do I attract the right talent into my organization in order for us to scale, to get more salespeople and whatnot. That's my couple points.
No, thank you. And I think those two dimensions are important. And as Lee mentioned, one of the things is that in B2B, especially in enterprise, and also especially if it's digital and technology related or software related, it's always a long game, right? So you can't be like rushing. It's not a land grab. You have to get things right, because imagine this, right? If you mess up on 2 or 3 customers, which you don't know till you find later, you're going to only increase your error rate if you're 10 customers. You'd rather be amazing at 2 customers who have great references at the first year and then scale to the next ones, right? So you have to balance between spreading yourself too thin and not being deep enough. But obviously, you don't also want to rely all your revenues on one client. So you have to balance that. But in the beginning, try to do the POCs, measure before you scale. Scaling is an art with some scientific data associated with it. And then the last part, which sort of wraps up all of this, is the change management component. And I think we alluded to aspects of it, but this is basically a combination of change management related to mostly the client, right? What are the change management aspects that you can influence, or you can influence people who can influence that? Sometimes it's a top-down approach. It's a new way of doing things. Maybe the user is a little reluctant, but if you have leadership buy-in, it'll eventually happen. But even then, users have to buy in because they're looking at for their own interests, right? But there could be a people component here. There could be a systems component, as I mentioned. What's the path to transformation? Who do you work with? There might be incumbents. So you might be trying to replace an internal software. Usually they're around for 10 years. Let's say the salesperson's friends, and you're at the last minute, and they give a deal that you can't afford. They give the same module for free. It's less, but the company's like, well, we know this entity, the devil you know versus the devil you don't. So change management is critical. Any thoughts there, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is just this is going to be a constant. Change is constant in modern life, modern work life. I mean, companies like, if everyone's here an entrepreneur, right, and if you're to be like, you're probably thinking about disrupting, taking market share from an existing incumbent, right? The last thing. Why is that? You need to, at someday, if you're successful, you're going to become an incumbent, and you got to think about how to change your organization to. I know that's far down the road, but like, you need to think about how to constantly, or even just like when you get to Series A or B, there will be other like earlier stage companies that are thinking about the same stuff that you're doing, and they're gonna get like, they want to disrupt not only the the incumbent you're trying to disrupt, they're trying to disrupt you too, right? We see like every year we see lots of companies just coming out doing all sorts of stuff. So you know, that change management, I feel like it's also yourself, like having a mentality to just understanding like always be willing to change your mindset, change your habits, change your behaviors.
Yeah,
I
and I
think
think
that's very
culture is
important.
absolutely, and the culture is a key component of it, because I mean, if you think about it, right, let's say CRM, right, customer relationship management. So I remember Siebel used to be one of the big players, right? And then Salesforce came and destroyed Siebel, right? And there'll be others that come, right? So there's a need for constant change management within, and a constant change management working with customers, and you know, culture always is a critical component of that.
Yeah. And just to add a last thing, like, you know, one of the things I don't ever like take into account, like, you know, whenever I see a startup, people, so recently there are, I don't know if anyone's following Silicon Valley news, but there are new search engines that's emerging that's raised hundreds of millions of dollars that's challenging Google, right? And I think like, you know, in the startups that Imran and I look at, a lot of them are doing stuff that, you know, other existing incumbents are already doing, and people are just like, oh, why couldn't Microsoft or Google or Facebook just do this? I don't ever, you know, every investor is different, but for me, I don't ever take that into consideration to evaluate whether a startup is going to do well or not. Because if you have that kind of mindset, you would never, you would, I mean, Facebook is not the first social media, right? YouTube was not the first video sharing site. Zoom, this big night, this big tool that this year just blew up, everyone's using. When they were starting, Skype was which was owned by Microsoft, is the number one tool that people are using. You know, you can just dismiss Zoom. Oh, why would I want to use Zoom? Skype can do the same thing, right? So, and I think, you know, as this last point, I also want to just tell all the entrepreneurs, because change is constant, there's constantly opportunities, and don't ever let that be like deterrent to you, for if you want to, you know, truly passionate about something you want to build. But the key thing is just be realistic to understand, like, can you really build something that's better? And do you really know how to scale it better than existing incumbents? So that's the real question you need to ask. So
Awesome. So thank you. This was great. So again, remember the 5 lessons are on moving from proof of concept and beyond. You know, you start off with understanding the organization. You then, you know, focus on what's the real value that you're providing through your product and service. You know, then we talked about what was the third thing, was success measures. So how are we measuring the pilot program? What measurement plan do you put in place? Then we talked about scaling it. We spent a lot of time on that. And then finally, change management. So hopefully this was helpful. Lee, thank you so much for partnering with me on this. Again, you can look at mentors.fund, http // mentors.fund, or sabidigital.com. So we work across both, as Lee and I mentioned. And wishing all the entrepreneurs best of luck, and hopefully this was valuable for you. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your sessions. Thanks.
great, thank you. All right.